And it does very much echo back the history of the importance of the City of London and the monarchy and the role that the Lord Mayor plays, because he takes precedence over everyone else except the monarch.
Yes, and the order of precedence sort of list of the most important people in the realm. Monarchs have always known that they can't do much without the help of the city, so better keep the city on side.
So everyone taking their places, and these proclamations, this is the second one that we will have heard today, and they continue tomorrow, don't they? They continue right around the kingdom. There will be more.
We'll hear one in Edinburgh tomorrow, and I think also, we're getting further announcements later today actually about what will unfold over the days ahead. But certainly Scotland is next in line for, and of course there's a different sort of heraldic body up there led by the Court of the Lord Lion. So again, we'll be discovering aspects of the sort of the machinery of the state that we don't really see very often, but which should nonetheless still play a key part in these constitutional moments.
And complete silence there in the City of London is very rare. That is a very busy part of London, isn't it? Very rare to hear no noise at all. Everyone waiting for the moment when this second proclamation will be read by the Clarenceux King of Arms. That's Timothy Duke. He's one of the three heralds who are the King of Arms. And the Lord Mayor of London, what a year for him. It's a one-year position, isn't it? It's held for just 1 year, but his year has included the Jubilee, the 70th anniversary of the Queen's reign, and now a new king.
It is, as you say, it's these roles come around every year. The Lord Mayor's show is part of that rotation. And whereas some of the other sort of offices of state, if you like, well, they're occupied for years. People can sort of plan them for years, but Lord Mayor never knows what's going to happen on his or her watch. And as you say, I mean, to have a jubilee and those extraordinary scenes at St Paul's Cathedral back in June, when again the city played its key part in the jubilee celebrations, and now, of course, a completely different atmosphere. But once again, this sort of ancient economic hub of the nation playing its key part in a very important moment.
The trumpeters echoing around the City of London.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We therefore, the Lord Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London, and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles, Philip, Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St. James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord, 2022. God save the King.
God save the King.
Three cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray! Hip hip, hooray!
A huge cheer, a huge round of applause from the crowd there watching the second proclamation of the day that has just taken place at the Royal Exchange. And watching all that as it was happening, and watching as the procession now departs and heads back towards Mansion House, is Sonali Shah. Let's join her now.
What a moment of history here at the Royal Exchange. The silence, that's what you could really hear, the silence of thousands as they watched the proclamation. And then, as the last words were said, they were echoed by everyone around here. And the national anthem, you know, for many of these people, for most of these people, this will be the first time they have sung the new national anthem. And that was very, very moving. A lot of people with their hands on their hearts, a few tears I've seen in the crowd over here. And people are here with a heavy heart. They want to remember Her Majesty the Queen. They are talking about their memories of her, but they also want to welcome the new king. And then when those cheers came, you could hear the cheers and the echo of the cheers ripple through the city of London here. It's been quite a moment for everyone. And so many people here talking about how they had to come here today to witness history in the making.
Sonali, thank you. The colour, the pageantry, the history that we have just seen take place there in London today, and that will continue tomorrow, Robert Harmon, won't it? Across the country, across?
It will. In the time-honoured tradition, from here there'll be major proclamations in the capitals of the devolved nations, in Edinburgh and Cardiff and Belfast. But then, it rather like it did in the old days, if one can say that, it will be read on cathedral steps in county towns, and then from there it will be proclamations by local authorities up and down the country. So although we're obviously seeing the City of London here, it's not just a London event by any means. You know, wherever you are around the country, perhaps tomorrow there will be that proclamation being delivered to a local community, and that's as it always has been.
It is all about, David Olusoga, it is always all about the continuity. Monarchy, it keeps going. We have had the death of the monarch very recently, but the passage keeps continuing, doesn't it? The crown is being handed on very quickly.
It is almost hard to believe that it is 48 hours since the passing of the Queen, because things have happened so quickly. Of course, in the age of absolute monarchs, there was very dangerous reasons why you would want accession to be confirmed, to be proclaimed, and to be unquestioned. I think what we're seeing here are traditions that we forgot we had. If you lived in the first half of the 20th century, you would have seen, if I've got my maths right, 4 passings of monarchs through death and abdication. You would have witnessed this in a much more less direct way 4 times. 70 years since these traditions were enacted. So it is reminding us of these layers of tradition that we've just forgotten about. And it is remarkable to see them. I'm looking at the trumpeters, and I'm thinking they've marched from the Royal College of Arms. Well, in the Royal College of Arms is a vellum roll of the 1511 Westminster tournament, which has royal trumpeters on it. So this sense of continuity, I mean, we are talking centuries and centuries.
But also, this has all been gathered together at incredibly short notice.
Well, I think we all heard rumours about how well planned things were, Operation London Bridge and Operation Unicorn. Well, I think we can now see the fruits of all of that detailed, careful planning. But of course, it has happened very quickly, very rapidly. That's why it's so shocking. So I think it's, you know, we're seeing the fruits of that that preparation, but we're also seeing real dynamism by the authorities to make this happen so quickly.
I just think it underlines the if you like, the allure, that there's some sort of almost primeval power of monarchy. It may be unfashionable to say so, but we have actually, in our last lifetime, we have seen another monarch buried. I remember just a few years ago witnessing the funeral of Richard III in Leicester after he was discovered under a car park. And of course, nobody knew him. He was a much demonised king. Nobody could possibly care 2 hoots about him. It was over 500 years ago. And yet, as his coffin came through on a gun carriage through the streets of Leicester, it was absolutely extraordinary. A sort of silence fell, and his funeral took place in the cathedral, and there was a sort of reverence accorded to you know, this man is alleged sort of child murderer from hundreds of years ago, and yet this was a king. This was someone who is, you know, who's part of our history, and our reigns and our monarchs. They form the sort of punctuation marks, don't they, in our national story. And it's at times like this that we recognise that.
And I think irrespective of your views on constitutional monarchy, the rights and wrongs of a hereditary position, this is history. Irrespective of your views on it, this is part of our history, and we're seeing it enacted today.
I think we have had an idea as well of what is to come at the funeral of the Queen Mother. And when she lay in state, I remember well, I remember going in there and walking past her coffin. It was in the middle of the night, and the extraordinary atmosphere, and the thousands of people who turned out to file past her coffin. And that is going to happen again, isn't it? That is going to happen for the Queen.
It really is, and I think that, you know, they have to give some thought as to how they manage that, because with the Queen Mother, the queues got so long. At one point, it was a 24-hour queue. I remember having to take a taxi to go to the end of the queue to talk to someone at the back and say, "You do realise you're going to be queuing for 24 hours?" And they went, "Yeah, well, we've got snacks." And they queued through the night, and it was something. It was hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to pay their respects, and some people are old enough to remember doing that for Winston Churchill. How the millions who are going to want to pay their respects to the Queen, well, anyway, that's a matter for another day. But I mean, everyone right around the world, but I'm sure millions, tens of millions of people in this country are going to want to say that they paid their respects.
And it will be, Elizabeth, for the family as well, a deeply private moment, although it will be played out very publicly, won't it? My darling Mama is what is how the new king referred to the Queen in his public address yesterday.
And he had such a close relationship to her. And it was so special and important to him. But do you know what I was reflecting just now? This is so much focused on London inevitably today. But only in my village in East Sussex yesterday, the bell ringers came together to toll the bell for an hour, to ring the bells for an hour. There were people coming to the churches. This will be happening across the country. It's not just about urban centres. There are people in their own villages and their hamlets coming together. And that matters. And the Prince of Wales, as he was, the King now, was one of the greatest champions for the countryside. There's such a strong bond there. So as much as we've heard today about his remarkable work in inner cities and bringing people together, and Black Lives Matter and all these important issues, he was the voice of the countryside. And the Queen Consort is too. They're great countrymen. They truly understand that part of the United Kingdom, which is so special. It's 70% of this country is the countryside, and that matters.
And it is going to be a very strange few days, week or so now, isn't it? Because there is still this shock about the transition, about what has happened.
I think people will there'll be little things that just sort of trigger it. Everyone will go about their lives and probably go back to work on Monday. And then suddenly there'll just be something, you'll see a post box and it says E2R, and you're suddenly thinking, hang on, it's now C3R. I was looking at the state trumpeters there, their magnificent tunics, all that embroidery. I mean, at some point, there's got a lot of sewing coming up, because someone's got to, you know, redo that. All. If you think where E2R is, just the Queen's cipher, the Queen's imagery, her face is the most reproduced image, arguably, in history, because of all the coins and banks and banknotes and stamps in all her various realms over 70 years. And suddenly all that's going to change. And we just one day we'll reach into your purse and go, oh, good heavens, look, there's the King.
A final word from you, David?
It's interesting. I think it obviously is going to change, the banknotes, the stamps. But, I mean, after the passing of Queen Victoria, there was a flurry of naming things after Queen Victoria. And I think there will be another way in which Elizabeth II is printed on the country, even allowing Charles to take his rightful place on coins and notes.
Well, thank you all very much for joining me this morning for as we witnessed history, an extraordinary moment not seen ever before in our lifetimes. What we witnessed, we were very fortunate to see it. Thank you all for being with me. So much change, so much upheaval in such a short space of time. A new Prime Minister, a new cabinet, the death of a Queen, a constant for 70 years in all our lives. And this morning we have just witnessed the proclamation of the new King, King Charles III. We are at the start of many days of mourning, but also this is the beginning of a new chapter as the crown is passed from king, from queen to king, as it has been down the centuries. King Charles III, a new monarch and a new beginning. Goodbye.
Three cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
And welcome, you are still with us here on BBC News on the day that King Charles III has been formally proclaimed as the new monarch. And we stay with these live pictures from central London at the end of that formal ceremony, the proclamation, formally noting that we all have a new king, King Charles III. Hello and welcome to BBC News. On the morning that King Charles III has been formally proclaimed the new monarch in a ceremony at St James's Palace in central London. It's a ceremony that was traditional, performed in front of about 200 members of the Privy Council. But there was one new element to it today, the fact that it was all televised. The Privy Council includes, for example, the Prime Minister, a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and all surviving former Prime Ministers.
The business for part 1 of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself, shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King!
God save the King!
So, part of that ceremony earlier today, Privy Councillors then gathered in the throne room of St James's Palace to hear the King's address.
business for part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony, and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite Your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken. I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
Well, after that signing, the Garter King of Arms then stood on the balcony of St James's Palace and proclaimed Charles III the new king.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. By the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord 2022. 3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
And 3 cheers for the new King. And as we hear the national anthem, perhaps still all of us getting used to hearing, to singing, God Save the King. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale was at that ceremony at St James's Palace. He joins me from there. A ceremony steeped in tradition, in etiquette, James, but of course televised for the first time.
Yeah, and that had a really interesting impact, actually. I was talking to some of the members of the Privy Council after that, and they said it was almost like the liturgy of a church, actually. A lot of it very formal, a lot of it very, procedural and, orders and council and this and oaths of that. But they said that actually just by the recitation of that liturgy of the Constitution, if you like, many of them found it incredibly emotional. I mean, when they came out of that meeting, waiting for the proclamation formally to be made, they came just here and they milled around, and quite a few, I have to say, were blinking their eyes. It was almost as if this was the moment, at least for them, that the penny had dropped of the extraordinary change that has taken place to this country. And as I said, so we had ministers past and present, prime ministers past and present, all sitting here after the formal meeting was over, waiting for that proclamation, and then just like everybody else around us in the crowds, getting their cameras out, taking photographs, capturing that moment with a little bit of modernity after the ancient ceremony inside.
And that picture you paint is so striking in itself, isn't it? This is a tradition that dates back to the days where you had to proclaim to the various nations, the various parts of the UK that you had a new monarch. You had to tell the people that way. And we're looking at all the images now. Archbishop of Canterbury, former Archbishop of Canterbury, former Prime Ministers. Look at the roll call. These are people, by definition, used to a degree of formality, rules, procedures, and yet you describe them using their phones to take photos in the way that any of us would.
Yeah, I think we're witnessing here is that mixture of the ancient and the modern, the continuity of the constitutional procedure, one that none of us frankly know about. I mean, we all had to look up what happens at an accession council because it hasn't happened for so long. But actually realising that that's the significance of it, and the fact that it's more significant now that we have the technology to broadcast these things to the world so that everybody else can share in them, at the same time as being able to look at the new king and to hear what he says and to learn from his words about how he's going to rule. I think that's the really interesting thing that we're seeing here, is that mix between, on the one hand, paying tribute to the Queen, marking her passing, assessing her reign, but at the same time learning from the king, from his own words himself, how he is going to do it, how he is going to do things the same as he made clear this morning. He's renew his pledge to live up to his constitutional duties as much as his mother, but also just to find out a little bit more about how he's going to do things perhaps differently in the future.
Yes, and we are going to talk about exactly that in the next few minutes. Thank you for painting that picture for us. Thank you. That's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, who was at that ceremony. And in the last few minutes, the new king has returned to Buckingham Palace following that ceremony. Driven through the gates just in the last few moments. Again, you see those images, you just get that sense instantly of the huge numbers of people that are there at Buckingham Palace this Saturday lunchtime. And our correspondent Rebecca Jones is there as well. You've been watching the day's events and you doubtless will have seen, Rebecca, the new king being driven back to the palace in the last few minutes.
Yes, Jane, we saw King Charles III arrive here at Buckingham Palace within the last 20 minutes or so, and so warmly greeted by the huge crowds that have gathered here. And there's no doubt that there are more people here at Buckingham Palace today than there have been over the last couple of days, all different ages, from all different sorts of backgrounds, both from London, but I've also met people from further afield who've travelled from across the country and of course from abroad. Many people clutching bouquets of flowers with messages attached and drawings as well. I was particularly struck by one message from Poppy, who's age 7, and she'd written, "Sorry that the Queen has died and gone to heaven. I liked her corgis." And people are being encouraged now not to bring their flowers here to the palace and lay them at the palace gates, but instead take them to Green Park nearby, which is fast becoming a carpet of flowers, a garden of flowers. And of course, yesterday we saw the new king take his time to meet some of the crowds that had gathered here to hear some reflections on his mother and her long reign, and of course condolences. But he was also very warmly greeted. We saw that kiss, didn't we? And we also heard those shouts of "God save the King," and no doubt the many people who are still here at Buckingham Palace will be hoping that he might repeat that and come out and meet the crowds a little later. But he does have a very, very busy afternoon of meetings ahead of him. He'll be meeting religious leaders, including the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Westminster, political leaders, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, who of course he met yesterday, and she offered her condolences, and we know that he said to her that when his mother died, that was the moment that he had been dreading. Well, she will be here with members of her cabinet and also opposition leaders as well. So a very busy day ahead for the new king. For his reflections, I'm joined here at Buckingham Palace by our home editor, Mark Easton. And Mark, I am curious to know what you've made of the day, because in some ways it's so informal, people just milling around here, aren't they? But yet we've also seen the height of tradition today, haven't we, at St James's Palace?
Such a contrast, isn't there, between the informality of that walkabout yesterday when, you know, the crowd were embracing the new king physically, and then we see this, I mean, to outsiders, perhaps even to us, it is extraordinary. It is quite odd. The language, the strange hats that people wear, the walking about, the nodding, and yet there is something incredibly important about that, and it's important right now. It was interesting, I thought, what the king said in his address to the country last night. If I can remind you, he talked of the late Queen's abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress. And I think for Charles, it will be about trying to find the right balance between the ancient and the modern. But the ancient is not just ancient, the ancient is current, and that matters because at a time of uncertainty, and goodness, we've got a new Prime Minister and a new King within days of each other. Both of them are obviously novices at the job. One hopes they're getting good advice. So it is a moment when we need perhaps to have some sense of stability. And I do think that when we see these ancient ceremonies with their archaic language, it allows people to connect with the backstory, with the history, and that can feel solid. It can feel reassuring, I think.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned that address last night, but I also feel the tone has been repeated today. There's a mixture as well, isn't there, of the formal but also the very personal.
Yes, the address last night was not the kind of sort of super formal address that we had as part of the proclamation ceremonies today. Yeah. It was personal. He talked about his mama. Yeah. You know, he talked about
his darling mama.
Darling mama, yeah. Yes, and there was emotion there. And I think in a way it's interesting how he behaved at the walkabout yesterday. It was a very touchy-feely king, in contrast to his mother, actually, who always kept her sort of private feelings very separate from her public duties. Charles, it would appear, maybe slightly more comfortable in showing his own personal feelings about things. And I think that was, in the way that he delivered that address last night, there was something sort of deeply personal about it, and I think actually in this day and age, and maybe this is partly why he does feel confident, people like that. Yeah. They like to see that. Yes, they want all the solemnity. They want to see, you know, the ceremony, the tradition, the custom and the convention. They need that. but also a little twinkle in the eye. Yeah, we like that too. That's really important.
Yeah, and in some ways it's down to work today, isn't it? He's got these meetings with political leaders and religious leaders. Do you have any sense of what they might involve?
These are the initial meetings of the king with these key figures in the establishment.
Yeah.
And yes, he's now having to get on and be a king, do the job. And you know, obviously we've had the ceremonial this morning. These will be quite formal meetings. You know, there will be a process to be gone through, but it's also, I think, about relationships. I mean, Charles will know all these people because he's been Prince of Wales for so long. Today, though, he greets them as king, and that's different. And that's why today really matters.
Mark, for now, thanks for that. Mark Easton, our home editor. And with that, from Buckingham Palace, I'll hand you back to the studio.
Rebecca, many thanks. Rebecca Jones there outside Buckingham Palace. A few umbrellas just starting to go up there, I could see in the background, but my goodness, every time the camera moves across, you get a sense of the sheer number of people who are gathered there, don't you? Perhaps to be expected over the course of a weekend when people perhaps have a little more time off, but it is fair to assume that those numbers will continue to grow. Let's discuss what we've seen so far today with the royal historian. First of all, Dr. Jonathan Spangler. Very good afternoon to you. A very traditional ceremony that we've been witnessing at St James's Palace, but televised, an appropriate nod, I think, to modernity. What did you think of what you were witnessing?
Well, I have to say it was quite extraordinary. As someone who has been studying monarchy, ceremony, ritual, my professional career, to suddenly see it unfolding in front of my eyes was quite extraordinary. I have to say, and as someone who's just been interested in the British royal family since I was very small, and even fortunate enough to meet the Queen when I was at university. It really means something quite a lot, and I think it means something to quite a lot of people in this country.
And we again get the sense of the sheer enormity that everything that the nation is going through. We are reminded endlessly of the longevity of Her Majesty's reign, because our correspondent was explaining to us that you look at the people in the room, prime ministers, former prime ministers, Archbishop of Canterbury and their predecessors. These are experienced people used to these formal set-piece events. And yet, he said, as you watch them all emerge afterwards from that ceremony, there was a tear in the eye of many of them. And that is really striking, isn't it?
It really is. And I was struck as well by watching these things. And a friend of mine actually sent me a message saying, is it interesting that in this one moment we can see all of the figures of the political spectrum and religious and secular life mingling together in finally sort of one united moment. And to me, that's really one of the central things about the institution of monarchy, whether you're a supporter or not, is that because it floats above politics, it's one of the few elements of British society that really can unify such a large and diverse group of people.
And I'm interested in your take on what we have heard thus far from the still very new king in terms of looking forward, giving us some hints as to what his reign will look like, as to what he will strive to do. And he's talked about following his late mother's example. What are your thoughts about, as someone who's clearly deeply studied the monarchy, as to the tone that he is adopting thus far?
Well, I think that it was immediately evident that the tone, as he sort of indicated that it would, really shifted dramatically from heir to the throne to actually being on the throne. And that any whispers and talk over the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades of him suddenly changing elements of the proclamation or changing elements of the ceremony really didn't happen. And so while I'm sure there will be changes to the monarchy along the lines of what's already happened, the slimming down, the more modern approach, the more social friendly, at the same time, it's a very traditional organization, and it will continue to be so. I really would like to say, certainly see more in the coming days, even more of a reaching out to the other nations of the Commonwealth all around the globe.
Oh, that's interesting, because the Commonwealth's very dear to the late Queen's heart, as we know. Are you suggesting that there is always more that can be done, more inclusiveness? What's your point there?
Well, I'm not sure I was suggesting something, but and then they certainly mentioned the other realms and territories, and they made a big deal, I think, this morning in the ceremony to be inclusive, certainly from a legalistic point of view, of Scotland and the Church of Scotland. But I think that it would be really, really quite interesting, and I'm sure something will be happening in the coming days, to reassert links of the monarch as the King of Canada, as the King of Australia, etc.
Very interesting to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for now. I imagine we will talk again. Thank you for now. Dr. Jonathan Spangler there, joining us from Manchester. And in a few moments, we will discuss everything we've seen and indeed the coming days and weeks with Sir Anthony Selden, the royal historian as well. But before we join him, let's talk to Atifa Shah, who has met now King Charles III many times in her role as a founder member of Her Majesty's British Asian Trust. Atifa Shah, welcome to our coverage. You have met, well, then Prince Charles very many times indeed. So first of all, we're all so interested to know your thoughts on him, what you've learned from him, the conversations you've had with him over the years, and what you think of him.
Yes, of course. I actually met His Majesty now in 2007. I was very young at the time, and it was at an awards dinner. This, actually, no, it wasn't at the awards dinner. It was actually at Clarence House. That was the first time I met His Majesty. And a lot of the conversation that we had was very interesting. His Majesty took a very keen interest in understanding how what are the issues and the challenges that were being faced by minorities in England. And it was beyond than just an interest, because what His Majesty at the time wanted to do was really play an active role in addressing some of those challenges. And in 2007, in 2006, actually, the Young Muslim Leadership Programme in Oxford was initiated by, at the time, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and now His Majesty. And that has continued on and still continues today, and has impacted a number of young people from across the country who then go back into their communities and help to mentor and help to guide a lot of young people that perhaps do come from those marginalised communities. And beyond that, when we visited Clarence House in 2007, His Majesty actually asked us, he said, what can I do more? Because through this Young Muslim Leadership Programme, I will have 20-30 people that will come each summer, and they will study this programme and then go back into the communities. But for me, I want to have an even bigger impact. And through His Majesty's personal efforts and friends, in 2008, Mosaic was born, which became a mentoring initiative across the country that has helped thousands of young people from deprived communities to achieve things that they probably thought they never could.
That is so interesting, because I think you're suggesting that he was aware of the influence that he could have, that having his help behind something could drive the organisation forward. So was your sense that it was coming from a very genuine personal place? He wanted to do more. He knew that his influence could have an impact.
Absolutely. The invitation we received at Clarence House was a personal invitation from His Majesty to come and discuss what more could be done for the communities that we belong to. And I actually remember specifically His Majesty saying that, how can I help to enhance the good work that you are doing in society? And, and that has stayed with me many times. And, it's not common for particularly people like me from the north of England to be meeting at the time the Prince of Wales so many times. And when I talk to people about my experiences and my conversations with His Majesty, they very much, and I always talk about that one time, my first meeting with His Majesty, and I just knew at that time that this was somebody that genuinely, wholeheartedly wanted to help those that he felt were perhaps marginalized in some way, or sort of go beyond what charities, other charities that existed. But that's the UK. Actually, I have seen and have witnessed the work and the impact His Majesty has had beyond the UK and into the Commonwealth, and through the British Asian Trust, for example, has has curated campaigns, I would say, that have dealt with issues such as mental health, which is something which we have seen, sort of a pattern of throughout the royal families dealing with some of those core issues. And His Majesty has never shied away from the most difficult issues in our society. And I think that all comes from a place of genuine interest.
Atifa Shah, a real pleasure to talk to you. I hope we may speak again. Thank you very much for now. Thank you for your time. As promised, we are also going to talk this lunchtime to Sir Anthony Seldon, historian, author of many biographies, of course, and he joins me from outside. I think it looks as if you're in Windsor, Sir Anthony, so I hope you can hear me well, but it's good to talk to you again. But my goodness, we've been watching these images from St James's Palace, and what a week. A new monarch and a new Prime Minister.
Yes, isn't that fascinating? And this has not occurred before since the birth of the democratic age. And you know, if anyone was watching this from Mars this week, they'd think, new Prime Minister, what a enormous big deal that is. And then they'd think, hold the horses, new monarch, death of a monarch, new monarch, totally and utterly eclipsing it, and everyone has all but forgotten that we have a new Prime Minister and the new monarch is what everyone is talking about, not just in this country with King Charles III, but all around the world. No other country has had a leader as famous as Queen Elizabeth. No other country, in fact, has such a successful monarchy, which remains relevant. When the Queen became to the throne in 1952, there were 100 monarchies. Now outside the Commonwealth, there are a mere 25. They're either irrelevant or they are despots, they're autocrats as kings. Britain and Japan are so unusual in having a monarchy that is actually relevant and so dominant and so important inside the country and Britain's place in the world. Remarkable.
Remarkable indeed. And to today's ceremony and everything we've seen in the last 24 hours, I am very interested, of course, in your take on what we have heard, the tone, the mood of what we have heard from the new king already. A lot of people very touched by his address yesterday. And what are we learning, what are you learning about what sort of king he is likely to be?
Well, it comes from the heart, doesn't it? He spoke from the heart about his mother. She was his mother as well as all our queen. About his darling wife, but also about his children, and including Harry and Meghan, and that desire to forgive and be inclusive. He was more attacked than many Prince of Wales have been in the past for his ideas, and yet what's fascinating is that his ideas have anticipated the 21st century. His emphasis on the green agenda, on the environment, on local communities, on arts and crafts, on mental health, on the importance of a holistic education, a rounded education, on volunteering, on the importance of faiths. I mean, these are the great issues of the 21st century. So I think he will continue the work of our great lost queen and take the monarchy forward, modernise it, keep it relevant, and ensure that it's handed over to his son, King William, as far away as possible, we hope in time, as something which is strong and as vital as it here is outside Windsor Castle here today on this sad day in 2022. And having had that magnificent historic cemetery this morning at St James's Palace, no country on earth does ceremony, history, tradition, like Britain.
Sir Anthony Selden, very good to talk to you as ever. Many thanks for your time. Thank you so much. Sir Anthony Selden there, biographer, historian, speaking from Windsor. And all the while, our cameras, of course, still trained on central London. Following this morning's formalities, done so well, as Sir Anthony Selden was just outlining for us there. We stay very much focused on the capital here today because we know that the new king has plenty more formalities to come over the course of the afternoon. He has religious leaders to meet later on this afternoon. He has political leaders. And Sir Anthony Selden again reflecting on what a remarkable week this has been, meeting a still very, very new Prime Minister. And all the while, crowds gathered around Buckingham Palace to pay their tributes to the late Queen. Charles III has been proclaimed king in a historic ceremony at St.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. Our top stories. Charles III is proclaimed king in a historic ceremony at St. James's Palace, paying tribute to his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth.
And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
People queue to pay their respects as a wall of flowers continues to grow outside royal residences. And we continue to bring you reaction from around the world. Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull shares his memories of Queen Elizabeth.
The Queen had been part of all of our lives, She was, for the 70 years of her reign, a source of reassurance, of steadiness.
Hello, welcome to the programme. Charles III has been formally proclaimed king in a historic ceremony at St James's Palace in London. King Charles paid tribute to his late mother, saying her reign was unequalled in dedication, duration and devotion. He vowed to follow her example and seek peace, harmony and prosperity of all the nations where he is now head of state. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell was watching.
In the setting of London's original royal palace at St James's, the Accession Council, a meeting of 200 privy councillors, Britain's political leaders, past and present, with other notable figures, a meeting rooted in past centuries, essential to the transition to a new reign and seen for the first time through television. The King joined the Accession Council gathered in the palace's throne room to make his declaration.
It is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathise with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. My mother's reign was unequalled in its duration, its dedication and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
The King took a centuries-old oath to preserve the position of the Church of Scotland.
I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland.
Watched by the heir to the throne, Prince William, Prince of Wales, and Camilla the Queen Consort, he signed the oath Charles R. Charles Rex, King. And then a moment of pageantry. From a balcony, the proclamation of the new king's reign.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
The King's Guard gave 3 cheers.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray!
Following centuries-old tradition, the proclamation was also issued in the City of London. It will be repeated in Britain's other national capitals tomorrow.
Hooray! Hip hip!
Affirming and proclaiming the reign of Charles III to all corners of his kingdom. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, my colleague Rebecca Jones is outside Buckingham Palace, and we can